So it's a great pleasure for me to be here, and it's a great pleasure to have so many people interested in this topic, reading information structures. So thanks to Calgary UX for having me here, and as I say, thanks to all of you for being here. So what I would like to do is tell you a little bit about myself and the session this evening. So my DNA has got two parts. One strand is understanding deep design principles, and the other one is explaining to other people. So that pretty well sums up why I'm here and why I'm doing this. And before we start, I'd like to say, why should we understand information anyway? Well, it's a necessary skill in solutions design. Just a bit of a history lesson. And years ago, when I started designing solutions, and this was before many of you were born, I know that for a fact, I was a solutions designer. We didn't think of the disciplines UX, IA, UI didn't exist, or weren't at least named. And we were solutions designers. And since then, the discipline has become fragmented, and people are now UX designers, even as small as typography and copy and stuff like that. And we've somehow lost something by splitting into those disciplines. So I think what we're doing tonight is a little bit of cross-training and trying to bring you back into the solutions design view by learning a little bit more about information. And the good news is that information design is not a completely separate thing from everything you already know, but it supports what you already know, and you support it with what you already know. So that's the good news. And I would also say, practically speaking, that you should regard it as part of your on-ramp to taking more senior roles. Anybody can design a 5-page website, but if it scales up to 50 pages or 500 or 5,000 pages, your native visual design talents need a little bit of complement, and what I'm doing tonight is a bit of complement. So I think we're going to have a bit of fun. We're going to just do two things. One is we're going to deconstruct a richly connected site, and then we're going to put it back together better than it was before. So everybody okay with that? Yes, I suspect so. So first of all, the first part, learning to read. And here's our brief. We're going to do it. We're going to pretend we've got a brief. We've been asked to look at BBC Food and make recommendations. And a bit about BBC Food. It's a big, rich site, more than 10,000 recipes, several hundred chefs, nearly 170 BBC TV programs about food. Can you imagine that many programs about food? Where do we get started? Well, it depends who you are. I think you all know this story about the elephant and the blind men who see the world differently. So if you're a visual designer, you might talk about grid, impact. Why is the global navigation so tiny? If you're a content auditor, you might do your own thing, and that might include, why are the bios of the chefs so boring? If you're an information architect, you might comment on the sitemap, labeling, and navigation. If you're like me, like us tonight, we'll put on our information X-ray goggles and see the site differently. So that's what we'll see. Oh no, that's about elephants. That's what we'll see. That's about websites. Now at this point, I think some of you will have leaned in and some of you will have leaned out. But either way, stay with me. We'll explain what this means and how to use it to make better solutions. So the point I'd like to make is that every time we have a solution, we have two ways of looking at it. We've got the surface view and we've got the information view. The surface view is what you see and what you interact with, and the information view is the information structures under the hood. And they're both important and they're obviously related. The surface view needs information to drive it and navigate it and give you functionality. The information view can be used to build a surface view, but it can also be used to build other surface views. So if you want to say which is primary, you would say the information view. For example, when BBC went mobile, they had two approaches. They could have taken the surface view and said, how do we shoehorn this into a mobile app? And a lot of companies did this. Or they could have said, what's the information we're dealing with? How is it put together? And then given that, starting from that place, how can we make a mobile app? So the information view changes pretty slowly if you get it right. And the surface views change with technology as we get new idioms, as we go into augmented reality, etc., etc. So when we build the information view, it's kind of like that information skeleton that we saw after the skeleton of the elephant. There are only three components, there are three elements. One is the components. So in BBC Food, it's recipes and chefs. These are the things we're talking about. The other thing is, what do we say about each of these components? So we can say recipes have ingredients, instructions, cooking times. Relationships, how does BBC Food relate the components? For example, recipes are contributed by a chef. So it's all pretty familiar in concept. And what we'll do now is look at some representations for making it clearer than the narrative form. So let's start off by the things that BBC talks about. An easy way to get a handle on this is to look at the global navigation. And we can see here that we've got recipes, chefs, programs, ingredients, and techniques. And underneath, I've put in the information view bubbles or blobs for each of those. Now, FAQs is also up there, and we'll document it at some point, but it's not the real reason people go to BBC Food to see the FAQs about its site. They go to see about chefs' programs and ingredients. Now, you have to realize that these are not just any old recipes from the whole world or any chefs from the whole world. They all exist and have a specific scope in the context of BBC Food. And we can maybe write it a little bit differently by saying a recipe is instructions for preparing a dish contributed by a chef. And a chef is a person who appears on a BBC Food show. So these concepts are related together in some way. And you'll notice we've gone from a blob to a box because there's a lot more that we want to say, which we'll do just now, about each of these things. So for each of these things, we're going to find out what is their specification? What are they made up of? And the best way to do that is to just go to some recipes, chefs, and programs and take a look. So here's a recipe. All the recipes have this same format, and it's our job right now to say, what is that format? And there are lots of clues. There are layout or visual treatments that are different, so the title looks different. So that's one part of it. We've got labels as well, ingredients, methods, preparation time. That gives us some other pieces. Now let's look a bit more closely at the first two sentences. This easy beef stir fry, blah, 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 is a description. Each serving provides 484 kilocalories, blah, blah, blah. That's dietary information. Do we consider that as one thing or two things? Well, conceptually, they're different. A better answer is you may want to display these things one at a time and not always together. So if you had a catalog of all BBC recipes, you may just want to include the title, a picture, and the description, and leave the dietary information later on. So that's my justification for separating them into two parts. And having done that, we have the attributes of a recipe: the name, the picture, the description, the dietary information, preparation time, cooking time, servings, ingredients, method. That's our first fully fledged information component. And we can play the same game with chefs: the name, the picture, a description, A content person would say, why is the description so boring? But that's not my job right now. We can do the same game with programs. It's a name, a picture, a description. Now there's a lot of structure down here really, but I'm just calling it episodes or other media. And ingredients. Now this is not what an ingredients page looks like on BBC Food. The problem with BBC Food is that it's not that good. It's not that bad and it's not that good. So the ingredient page for fennel seeds starts off with this description, and then it has 20 or 30 descriptions using fennel seeds. And then it has this information which is really about the ingredient, not about a recipe. So I kind of fudged this representation a little bit. So we have name, description, buyer's guide, storage, and preparation. And then the final thing is techniques, for example, how to cut an avocado. And it's got a name, media, description, and skill level. And in real life on the BBC Food site, it's full of recipes. So if ever you find yourself in a position where you've cut an avocado and want to know what to do with it, go on to BBC Food and it'll give you 50 recipes for what to do with a cut avocado. Anyway, putting all of that together, this is all of the components and all of the things that we say about them. It looks pretty similar. It's a subset of what we saw right at the beginning after the skeleton of the elephant. The only thing that's missing is that diagram had lines joining different components. And this is what we call the relationship structure. So what we want to know is, how does BBC relate the components? And again, we find out by looking. So if we look at a recipe, we can see at the bottom, there's a chef, and at the bottom, there's a program. So a recipe is contributed by a single chef. A recipe appears in a single show. These numbers are important. Sometimes there are multiple values. Sometimes there is 0 or 1. They're useful for the database designer, but that's their own magic. We're not there. We've got relationships about chefs. So if I start with a chef, then they contribute more than one or more recipe, and there are many, and they can appear in one or more of those 170 BBC Food shows. And if we start from programs, we can see at the bottom a whole stack of recipes. And if we went further down on the screen, we could see a whole load of contributing chefs. So if you put it together, we've got the relationship structure between recipe, chef, and program. And you can see there are bi-directional links. You can start anywhere. You can go anywhere. You can even go from one recipe to another. And this is what you see in the front end as well, that if you start with a recipe, you can go to a chef. You can see what other recipes they've done. You can go to the program. You can see what other chefs are in that program. So in this case, every recipe or every component is linked to every single one bi-directionally. That's not always the case. It's a decision, not a law of nature. It's a business decision or a solution decision. So if we look at ingredients, there's an obvious relationship between ingredients and recipes. Recipes use ingredients, ingredients show up in recipes. But there's no relationship between chefs and ingredients, and there's no relationship between programs and ingredients. And we'll come back to this later on. So what we've done is built the basic information model. What are we talking about? Its structure and how those pieces are related together. And that would be great if we handed it over to a database designer and they loaded all of the information from BBC in and made a big database, zipped it up and sent it into outer space as a record of civilization on Earth. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose is building a website that can be used by people. You see, the information model doesn't care how many recipes there are, but in fact, there are 10,000 or more. So the user cares very much. BBC Food has gone to great lengths to make it easy to find the recipe that you want. and we'll critique that later on. But those approaches also show up in the information view, not just the surface view. And let's see how. So going back to the global navigation, there is in fact a sub-navigation, occasions and cuisines. And I want to talk a bit about how they show up in the information model. Now you may have expectations as to what you'll see when you click on either of those, but the only true way is to look at BBC Food. We're doing a forensic information architecture. We're not guessing, we're finding out. So if I look at the occasions page for St. Patrick's Day, it starts off badly. It doesn't say St. Patrick's Day. It says St. Patrick's Day recipes. And in fact, the page is full of recipes. So it's not telling me anything about St. Patrick and Ireland and snakes. It's telling me how to get a subset of recipes. So occasion in the global nav is an organizing principle. It's not a type of information in its own right. Okay. Similarly with cuisines, it's full of recipes. It doesn't tell me anything about the special nature of Chinese cuisine. It's an organizing principle. And we can show it like this. This is the high level information structure, which we've now broken down into information components, and under each component, the organizational schemes that it uses. Now, that's a high level information view. If we go deeper, what we have to do is make two changes to the information component for recipe. And we see them at the bottom where we've added occasion and cuisine as new attributes. And we've called them metadata. And the rest of them we call specification. Here's the difference. A specification is what we need to make the recipe. We can make it without knowing what occasion it's for or what cuisine it's for. But occasion and cuisine help us find the right recipe. Now, because we're doing a complete deconstruction of the site, we also, for each of these pieces of metadata, list their allowed values. So occasion is Christmas, summer dinner, Diwali, barbecue. Cuisine is African, British, American. We don't have to display them in a set form. We can put them in a spreadsheet or in a list, whatever works for the purpose. Here I was interested in compactness, so I use this list format. So we found those by looking at the global navigation. And if we continue to look at the global navigation, we'll easily find some other things. We'll find we can search recipes by season or recipes by budget. We'll find that we can search techniques by the type of food being handled. Are we handling vegetables? Are we handling fish? Are we handling meats? So those are the easy finds. And I use the word easy find deliberately because I know that every time that I've done a deconstruction of a website, I've been surprised. And I call those surprises secret gardens, where there's one little link and you don't notice it the first 2 or 3 times through your audit. And then you click it and holy smoke, you're in a secret garden that you didn't expect, and it's got a lot more structure than you anticipated. And there are 3 secret gardens that I stumbled upon fairly late in the game. So the first one is if I look at an ingredient page for sea bass, it starts off with the description. The BBC way is to have lots and lots of recipes. And then at the bottom, there's something interesting, other white fish. Aha, I thought, we've got a categorization scheme here. I wonder how prevalent it is. So I looked up the ingredient for spaghetti, scrolled to the bottom. There it was, other pasta. Brilliant. There's a categorization scheme that's already there, but it's not central. I have to dig and look at a number of different ingredients to try to piece it together. So that was secret garden number 1. Secret garden number 2 was when I was looking at the shopping list associated with the easy beef stir fry. And it's the same ingredients, but if you notice, they've been organized into fruit and vegetables, tins, packets, jars, cooking ingredients, meat and poultry. This is fascinating they're trying to make it easy for me to shop. Now you should know that even though I'm looking at a recipe, this categorization scheme is a categorization scheme of ingredients. Every recipe's shopping list that has basmati rice will always be under tins, packets, and jars. Now, you may say that, is this your mental model of a shopping store? Not necessarily, or a supermarket, not quite, but not useless either. So I think it may be some value there. I stumbled upon the third secret garden a few days ago when I was preparing this talk, and I knew I was talking about beef stir fry, and I wanted the shopping list, but I couldn't remember which recipe it was, so I did a search. And when I did a search on easy beef stir fry, holy smoke, I found all of these filters that I hadn't anticipated before. Quick and easy, courses, diets, and they kindly put all of their allowed values in. So given all of those, I could now extend the information view so that recipes has these 7 access methods or organizational schemes. Ingredients has food type and shopping section. Techniques has food type. What about chefs and programs? Well, they can be displayed by the name of the chef or the name of the program, which is built into the definition of chef and program. We don't need to introduce another organizational scheme. And that works as well because there are fairly few chefs and there are fairly few programs. Okay, BBC Food has done one other thing to help us, and these are called curations. And again, we're just documenting what's there. And you'll find in many places, curate this structure, recipes, they have all recipes and they have featured. And the purpose of featured is to stop me having to look through 10,000 recipes, but instead it says, hey Martin, would you like veggies for breakfast? Questionable. The fact of the matter is that curations really have a structure. They have a name, they have a curator who's doing the curating, they have a purpose, and they have an ordered list of the things being curated. And sometimes, usefully, these are made explicit. So if you see Bill Gates' top 10 business books to help you thrive in the 22nd century technology world, you would know what the curation, the book list is about. You would lean in or you would lean back. But here, really it means featured recipes. You don't have enough information to lean in or lean out. So that's a little bit of a critique. And that kind of segues into critiques and innovations. So we finished the section on representing the information structure. It's a fairly mechanical process. You can get a wad of gun going and look through pages and document it the way that I've done it. But now we can get creative and start to use that for innovating. And every information element we've discussed so far can be a target. So we will and can critique components, attributes, relationships, and findability. And this is an important point. We're using the information model as a tool for thought. When we report back to our handlers in BBC Food, we won't show them our thought process. You will use your UX and interface design skills to come up with nice possible surface representations using sketches and mock-ups that will appeal more than an information view will. So in no particular order, let's do a critique. First of all, I want to go back to the sea bass. And if you remember at the bottom of sea bass, it had information about other whitefish. And I told you at the time, I thought there's probably somewhere in there a categorization scheme. So my thought is maybe we could bring this categorization to the surface. Maybe it's a categorization scheme that's multi-level, starting with meats and vegetables, and then meats go into seafood, and then fish and animals, and vegetables, fruit vegetables maybe. And I throw out the idea, maybe we have an ingredient navigator. And you UX interface design guys say, oh yeah, that could be good. We'll write it up in our report. We'll have a multi-level a list of ingredients that you can expand and contract. And when you click on whitefish, it will list all of the whitefish. Oh, and by the way, it could also give you some general information about white fish, that they're generally available and they're generally healthy, etc., etc. Let's do it. Okay, so we're pretty excited about that. Not everything is exciting. It starts off pretty mundane, but sometimes it starts off mundane and it can build. Here's something that you don't need to be an information architect to recognize is terrible. So if we're searching or browsing chefs, we put in the first letter of their name, and the chefs appear based on a match of the first letter. So you can see Tatty Prince or Fame Prince is there. I don't know why I said Tatty, short-sighted. The Bellamore family, there are lots of T's. There's the Ayubi family, the Bellamore family, the Clarence family, the Drake family, the Ely family, etc., etc. Useless, useless, useless. So we could at least propose allowing searching by user significant parts of the name. So Tatty could show up, Tatty Prince could show up under T, Tatty Prince could show up under P, the Bellamore family would rightly show under B. You could figure that out, but we could also consider other search interfaces as well, rather than the first letter. Same with something, same with the chefs. I'm a new user to BBC. I have no clue about their chefs. So I could maybe improve the presentation by digging in and saying, oh, the Bellamore family loves making puddings, and putting it there as a little bit of gloss underneath the Bellamore family. And Thane Prince loves salads, and the Ayubi family loves Moroccan, etc., etc. So I could do that. But then, hang on a second. Is there even a plausible user scenario for browsing the BBC chefs? Maybe the reason I would want to find a BBC chef is that I remember a certain chef had cooked a recipe I was looking for, and I want to find, but I don't want to browse. So maybe all of this browsing stuff is not necessary. Just because we have the information there, it doesn't mean we have to display it all in the simplest way possible. Okay, let's stay with chefs, but something much deeper. If I look a little bit further at chefs, it turns out that a chef is not always a single person. It's not always a person, the Vegetarian Society. They don't always appear on a BBC food show. It could be a visiting, contributing food author. So I was led down the wrong track by the fact that BBC Food used the term chef and talked about shows. And it was only until I drilled a little bit deeper that I thought we should probably change the concept from chef to contributor. Now, in one way, it's just a name change, but it really blows open the conceptual possibilities for who can contribute a recipe. So it could be other possible BBC contributors, like an actor in a sitcom, a character for a sitcom, an artisan appearing in a house hunting show, etc., etc. It could be people from outside BBC as well. So this simple observation about a chef not being a single person led to us completely exploding the universe of discourse for contributors to recipes. Okay, we said we were going to review everything. Let's critique and review relationships. So we've got a simple relationship here Ingredients are used in recipes, recipes use ingredients. But it can be implemented well or badly. Here's where it's implemented well. The user is looking at a recipe for chickpea braise, sees harissa at the bottom, wants to find out more about it. Yes, we have a relationship between recipe and ingredient. They can find out about harissa. So far, so good. The problem comes when they click on the link and they get to information about harissa. And it says harissa recipes. I didn't want harissa recipes. I wanted to know about harissa itself. So again, in the real page, there's not just one line of recipes, but there are several lines of recipes going way beyond the fold. And then finally, the useful stuff about the buyer's guide and storage. I would say that this user has come from a recipe that he knows and wants to make and just wants to find out a little bit about harissa. He doesn't want other recipes. So there's no need to see the recipes. Aha, Martin, you will say, I can find a usage scenario. Somebody gave me a gift of harissa when they came back from vacation in Morocco, and they want to know what to do with it. So if I get a bottle of harissa from a friend in Morocco, the first thing I'm going to do is not go to BBC Food Ingredients. The first thing I'm going to do is go to Google, or maybe if the jar of harissa has a little label, say, see wonderful recipes from www.ourharissa.com, that's where I would go. So no need for recipes here is my claim. And this is something that we'd want to give the reader, the user. Harissa, what it is, how to buy it, how to store it, and maybe not even a complete page load, but maybe just as a little pop-up when you mouse over the ingredient. So I have the idea, and the user experience people have all ideas for implementation. Let's stay with relations, but in a little bit more sophisticated way. We've seen that there's no relationship between chefs and ingredients. What that really means is that when we were looking at the BBC Food site, there were no built-in relationships between chefs and ingredients in that solution. In the real world, there can be lots of relationships between the chef and an ingredient. They can love it, they can hate it, they can have a funny story about it, they can have got sick with it, they can have an outtake involving this ingredient. So that gives us some ideas for different things that we can do with this relationship. For example, I float the idea we could introduce a new information component called funny story. And then the UX people could say, great, that could be displayed in lots of ways. If we go into a chef, we could have his funny stories. Or if we go into an ingredient, we could have funny stories about that ingredient. Or when we leave the site, there could be a pop-up saying, before you leave, would you like to hear one of our funny stories? Lots of fun, lots of ideas came from looking at something that wasn't there. Finally, let's review metadata schemes, because we said we were going to review everything. One of them is pretty good. It's Cuisines. Here's the list of Cuisines. There's a mixture of logical rigor and usability. Some of the geographical regions are different sizes. So we have Ireland and North Africa. We have Italy, we have East European. But it's pretty good. It aligns with the user's mental model. If we were doing a website for foodies, foods of the world, we would list and organize in a multi-level categorization scheme every single country from the largest to the smallest, and we would be miffed if it didn't have Honduras. Here, we're not bothered that it doesn't have Honduras. So that metadata scheme is okay. If we turn to occasions, here's what we get. Summer dinner, summer party, barbecue, picnic, Diwali, Halloween, bonfire night, Thanksgiving, autumn. So many different things. It's a real schmoz. Season of the year, the type of get together, a named occasion like a holiday or a religious one. And if we wanted to, we could card sort those and come up with some categorization. So it's poor. Is it a problem? Well, it's not great the way it is. It's not useful. Could we extract any use from it? And maybe we could brainstorm ideas and separate out the religious observances, have a calendar, explain what the observance is. And then all of these observances, when you see Ramadan or Diwali, you see people, you see families celebrating the event with sweets and sweet treats for the family. We could have sweet treats from every religious observance, that kind of thing. So from a simple metadata review, we've brainstormed some little ideas or some ideas for introducing quite different and possibly value add ideas. Okay, that's where we are. We're pretty well done. We've seen how to build information models. We've critiqued and we've leveraged our existing UX and UI skills to consider how our ideas could be presented back up to our sponsors at BBC Food. That's the text version, and usually we represent things either by text or by images. So I have a version 2. Let's just savor the moment. We've done a lot of work together, and thanks for bearing with me. We've started with something fairly familiar and ended up with something pretty wonderful, pretty decorated, pretty different than what we started with. So enjoy the moment for a second. Okay, so where are we and what's next? You could, if you're interested in this, continue moving up the on-ramp. A couple of suggestions for doing that if you're interested. First of all, go to BBC Food and look at it, revisit what I've already done, but I've only done about between a half and 2/3 of what's there. So it may be useful to play around, see if you can figure out what else is going on. Just to practice, just to experience it, do it for yourself rather than listen to me talk. If you want to learn more, you can go to my site at theinformationartichoke.com, and there it will tell you more about how to integrate information design with user-centered design. And there are some other ways I may be able to help a little bit more formally. If you're in Calgary and you want me to present this as in-house half-day workshops on this and related topics, reach out to me. If there are other people from other groups than Calgary UX, and I know there are, and you would like this kind of presentation for your own group, again, reach out to me and I'll be prepared to do what I've done now, except a little bit less rattled at the front end as we go forward. And now, if there are, I'm going to stop sharing, and if there are any questions, I'll pass them over to the moderator. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Martin. That was so insightful. And there was like so many things that I do not even think about when I go to the website. But when you point it out, it suddenly opens up my eyes. And it's like, yeah, that's true. That's a really fact. And it reminded me of a statement that I read about information architecture that said that you don't really see the good information architecture, you see the bad information architecture.
Beautiful.
So if you would like to start with the questions, I see Naveen in the chat has a question. Naveen, would you like to read your question to Martin?
Hi, I was just curious, can you recommend some books on what you talked about, or information architecture?
Okay, the most famous book is in its 7th edition now, and it's called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web and Beyond by Rosenfeld. It's very, very introductory, but if you've done nothing about information architecture at all, then it's probably the starting point that everybody has recommended. Another one is Making Sense of Any Mess by Abby Covert, which is a very fine book as well. For something that's a little bit more advanced, Pervasive Information Architecture by Resmini is a very good one. It's not an easy book. It's a book that will make you think. So you can't read 2 pages on the C train coming home. You need a quiet space and the right mindset. But it's got a lot of very valuable stuff once you've got the basics from the other 2 books I mentioned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I see that Alana also has a question. Alana, would you like to read your question to Martin?
Sure. So I'm a UX design generalist, and I was wondering what does a specialization in IE look like day to day?
That's a hard question for me to answer. And the reason it's hard is because I started my career in 1980 and I finished it in 2014. So I pretty much learned as I went along. There weren't a lot of resources out there. It wasn't very much of a discipline. I would say that there's quite a shortage of training on information architecture. There's an online institute whose name escapes me, IAI, but I can't remember what it stands for. That has a lot. The Neiman Group has a lot of training as well. So they would be good places if you want to pursue the information architecture specialization.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I see that there is a question from the chat about repeating what was the last book that you mentioned. If you could repeat for the chat.
Sure. It's Pervasive Information Architecture. It's by 2 people. The first one is Resmini, Resmini. Thanks, Luis. I'll make sure that we get that list together.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher the name, but Lilia Kshan, she has also a question. Would you like to read your question? Okay, maybe I will ask in that case. How would you think about implementation of accessibility while doing the information architecture work?
That's a very, very interesting question. A lot of the times it's not an IA specialization because, as I mentioned with the 2 views model, the information model itself can be implemented in many different front-end solutions, whether it's a website, with accessibility considerations or not, and the information architecture may not change too much. On the other hand, I've been thinking about conversational systems, and their way of interacting with information is quite different. Visually, we can scan big lists. We can put icons to help us recognize which item in the list might appeal to us or which one we should ignore. I don't know, some of those techniques of big lists and highlighting something in a big list don't apply easily in conversation. Alexa, read me the list of all BBC food chefs. useless, right? So we need some other approaches for refining our search approach so that we can have an audible, a conversational input where it recognizes the categorization scheme. It knows that avocado means an ingredient and is not the name of Mr. Avocado, the chef, right? You know, so I think when we come to conversational systems, we will need quite a different set of categorization that allows pinpoint accurate findability. Right now, we're used to not finding a single thing. We find a list and then we scan that list. In an audio world, we want the one answer, if possible. It can work in small domains. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I know it's an important question, and I know some of the dimensions of the problem, but not too many dimensions of the solution.
That's true. Also, there's another question from Dana. Dana, would you like to read your question? I'm not sure.
Sure. I gotta know, why the information artichoke?
Okay, that's my brand name, and it comes from a. Do you want to hear the story? Yes, obviously you do. Okay, so here's the story. A person was invited to a reception at the White House and was scared stiff, so they made that they were going to be introduced to the president, and they had to make conversation. They came up with a question, but perfect question, but on the night they blew it. So, Mr. President, isn't the White House a wonderful building? Can you remember the name of the artichoke who built it? And that's a joke, a silly joke, but I stole that joke because as an information architect, I thought that would be a funny brand name to use, and in fact, it is.
That's awesome.
Right.
I would like to ask Coral to introduce his next question, if you may.
Hey, Martin. Hi, everyone.
Well,
So I have a question. I love the example that you gave us, Martin, with BBC recipes, because that is a very large and broad topic that needs organization, and often has a lot of browsing and kind of subjective attraction to, a particular recipe, right? Like maybe I'm looking for artichokes and I come across a number of different recipes that whet my taste buds. Some of the stuff I'm working on is much smaller and more targeted and more focused. How do you modify your process for creating an organization for topics or libraries that are smaller, more targeted, more focused? Do you change your process, or do you follow the same one?
I follow pretty much the same one, but BBC Food is doing some things extremely badly. And when I had for example, the easy stir fry, it says, this is a wonderful recipe. And the next recipe I look at, it says, this is a wonderful recipe. And the next recipe I look at says, this is a wonderful recipe. They don't use any techniques really of information sent. Remember when you look at the chefs and they list their faces, and I said, this one loves making puddings, as a suggestion to make it easy for me to recognize what it is I'm looking for in a list. So I take the same process, but if I'm starting from scratch, I make sure that my content is not generic, my content is specific, my information sent is highly specific, and I can use information sent with text or with icons or color coding with a lot of different things. So if I know the domain, then I can ask the user, what are the distinctions that would make you want to look at this particular item or not look at the item? We don't want people people talk about sticky, and I don't want sticky information architecture. I don't want everything to have a kitten and make me stay on a page. I want to code or tag or provide scent so that if I'm looking through a list, I know which ones I should look at, which ones I should not even consider looking at. So if I'm building from scratch, I don't build it the way that I do, that we see when we're deconstructing BBC food, because as I said, it's got a lot of good stuff, but a lot of pretty poor stuff as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask the public if anyone has more questions. Come forward.
Well, I hope you don't mind, but I have a question that is lingering in my mind for a while. I love the analogy of the secret garden. I think it filled me with joy just thinking that there is this space, or there is this area of information that is waiting for me to be discovered. And this is the part that normally comes with delight. And I never thought about talking about delight and information architecture at the same time. So how do you build the secret garden?
I would say that I didn't build a secret garden. I think about secret gardens differently than you. I don't design. I'm just seeing this chat from Raul. I agree with you. I don't build a secret garden. What I was saying is, when I was doing forensic IA, I would often find secret gardens almost every time. For example, I was deconstructing the Home Depot site and I thought I had it nailed. And then there was a link, one icon that said DeWalt, and or maybe a manufacturer's name. And I clicked it, and there was a 200-page site of DeWalt's products. So that's a secret garden. So a secret garden is not something that I build. It's something that I suspect is often there, and I take great pains to make sure that I don't stop my analysis too quickly, because I may be surprised.
Oh, nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes quite a lot of sense.
Yeah, okay.
I also have a question. I was just curious because you showed us a lot of things that people sometimes don't realize. Do you have any misconceptions or mistakes that you see the most commonly when you deconstruct websites? Are there those bad apples? Kind of.
I would say that I don't think there's one mistake that you can chop out and everything will be good. Just as I critiqued every single aspect of the information model, and again, I'm only talking from an information model point of view, not the content, not the visual, but everything can be done. Everything can be done wrong. So I would say that there is no one thing. Usually what happens is that a site will be very, very good at one thing, and they won't have thought about the categorization schemes, or they'll have great categorization schemes, but they've chosen topics that people are not really interested in. For example, if you have a restaurant, when I go to a restaurant, I want to know what the menu is, where it is, pictures of the inside, how to make a reservation. I don't necessarily want to know that the owner came from Italy and it was his grandmother who first had the idea of a restaurant while she was harvesting olives in Puglia. Although some people may love that, so that may just be a personal opinion. But for me, I think one of the problems is making sure that you understand what the user is trying to accomplish, and it's never just one thing, But we discovered in the BBC, for example, that people don't want to browse a list of chefs, even though the technology allows you to have a list of chefs. right? There's no user scenario for it. So I think this is one of the the biggest problems, is that we haven't considered a usage scenario for the information. Information is created for a purpose. Like I emphasized, it's not a separate discipline, but it's totally interrelated between what you want, what you're trying to provide to the user, what their journey is. I'll give you an example if you've got time. A recipe in BBC Food is a recipe. You know, it looks the same always. But when I'm, as a user, thinking about a situation, I want to take my wife, I want to cook a special meal for my wife for our anniversary. So I have to find a recipe. I have to shop for a recipe, make sure the ingredients are in season and not problematic. How do I prepare the recipe? So I work in 3 different modes: deciding mode, getting ready, assembling mode, and preparing mode. But the recipe looks the same almost every time, but it doesn't have to. You know, the recipe could be like an ad going through a life cycle, right? When I'm browsing, it tells me features, why I should look at this, or warnings, this ingredient is not in season at this time. When I'm shopping, it should give me a shopping list like it does. It's pretty good. When I'm making, it doesn't need to convince me to go to this recipe. It needs to lay out the steps, maybe in a timeline or something like that, right? So we have to consider in every single way, what is the user trying to accomplish at every stage? Processes thread through information. Information is threaded through by processes. It's not just information.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for your answer.
Right.
I see also Naveen is having another question. Would you like to introduce your question?
Sorry, go ahead, Naveen.
Yeah, I mean, how do you differ your process? Depends on the devices. Like you explained about website. So what about the mobile apps, and their process differ, or how you approach?
I would say that from an information architecture point of view, a website and a mobile device use basically the same information. And it's the interaction designer who knows all of the idiosyncrasies of a website or the idiosyncrasies of mobile dev who will make that information fit and flow appropriately to the different device. So usually you don't change the information architecture very much. Sometimes you will come up with smaller versions of images, but I still call that media. You will come up with, instead of long descriptions, you'll maybe come up with a short one-line executive summary type description so that you can scan it, the information sent that I was talking to Raoul about, right? And then the interface will be a little bit lighter weight, which may be appropriate for a mobile device. But basically, the information architecture and the way that you think about the information architecture is the same. It depends really, though, if on the usage scenario. If you've got something that works on the web and on mobile, then maybe it's based on the same information. If you've got a user context which just uses mobile, then you would start from the usage scenario. Who's the user? What job are they trying to do in this mobile setting on this mobile device, and build back from there, build the information structure back from there.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I just realized that I missed Greg Olson's question. Greg, would you like to ask your question to Martin?
Oh, hi there.
Okay.
Thanks for tonight. No, you were fairly strong in your rejection of the perusing a list of chefs. I mean, maybe it's obviously useless, but was that rejection found from testing?
Okay, what you heard tonight was a story, right? That we looked at a site and we made some observations about the information structure and the usability, and from there we were going to use that as input into a report. So no, there was no actual testing done. This was not a real world case study. This was a pedagogic exercise. So in the real world, each of these ideas that I get excited about and jump up and down about would have to be validated. You know, somebody might come out of the blue and say, oh yes, here are 3 very good reasons why it's useful to browse a list of BBC chefs. And I would say, okay, now I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask my other question. I'm not sure exactly how to ask it, but basically just seeing how everything changes through the decades. How do you think about the future of information architecture? Like new trends, like what, if anything, will change? I don't know if I put it in the right words.
No, you expressed it in a very good way, and there are some places where I know a little bit, and some places where I know nothing. A few years ago, I did a MOOC on augmented reality, and I found that information architecture was very useful there because it allowed me to sketch out what the structure of of the entities were, even in a placemaking app where we had to put markers in the local surroundings. There was still an information architecture, and the modeling that I was talking about today worked quite well there. I also mentioned that if you're talking about smart buildings or smart interfaces, I suspect that you will still need to have these skills, because you will want the smart building or the smart object to interact with you in a certain way, and you will have to model not only the users but the information that you're trying to provide them under various circumstances. So that I do know about. In terms of conversational, I've already told you that I see there's a problem that I have no idea about. In terms of things like artificial intelligence, I really don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the artificial intelligence, sorry, I was just looking at a chat from sorry, I can't multitask. With artificial intelligence, I really don't know. I think it depends on whether we want to expose the details of the processing, or if we want just to have the result. And if we have just the result, it's a piece of information which will meet a user's needs, and we don't care to understand the way that it comes from, how it's retrieved. Other times we will want to know, and I don't know how to make that, how that would be made clear. I know very little about this area. I just think about an income tax program like TurboTax. You know, it does a calculation, and I believe it and I trust it, but I don't know how it gets there, right? And it'd be nice to have a function sometimes, if I paid for it, which would say, we made this recommendation because, and then it would come up with something like, we applied this rule because, and then we applied that rule, and then we applied that rule, and I wouldn't understand it anyway. So asking for insight and transparency sometimes is an area that I don't understand, and I don't know how achievable it is or valuable it is. With an AI or a neural net that's using its own alien processes, maybe. I'm speculating now. I'm really talking off the top of my head.
Thank you. I see that Raul messaged quite large message, and I'm sorry I haven't read it fully, but would you like to comment and engage because it seems really interesting?
Sure. I always love talking to Martin.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask a question. I knew you would.
That's why I came.
Exactly.
You know, if you want answers, you go to the person that has the answers, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting you talk about AR, augmented reality, and all of that stuff. And you know, like Google and other big data companies are constantly trying to figure out, you know, what is the object in the picture I just took. Are you aware of anyone like open sourcing these ontologies and classifications and these structures that they're coming up with to classify real world objects or things like that? Like, can we leverage some of that work for our own stuff?
Not so much open source, but I know there are vendors of taxonomies like Wand Inc. Who will sell technologies for healthcare or pharmaceuticals or petrochemicals, and to the extent they're widely adopted, they are valuable and a great time saver, especially when you're doing text processing on large bodies of input data and you want to do some auto categorization. I always find that there's a difference between the mental model and you know, some of the ways that we talk about structure from UX and from other disciplines. And UX will often say, use the language that the user uses. And I think, well, I'm trying to learn French. So it doesn't make sense. Or I'm trying to learn algebra or calculus. I'm trying to be educated in a certain area, not necessarily. On the other hand, with the BBC food example, you know, it wasn't a formal categorization of the countries of the world. It was fit to task, and that task being, you know, recipes that were in the database. So, you know, your first question, that was a long answer to actually not your question, but but the answer to your question is I know that there are certain taxonomy providers out there, but not necessarily open source.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I would just like to ask the public if anyone else has any more questions.
Wow, fantastic. Well, I have one question, and this is a error on my side. I know you have actually several books, and you were so kind of that you didn't mention them. Where we can find them, or what would be the best way to reach out to all the information that you have developed over time?
Sorry, I haven't ever prepared a reading list, but I can help with a reading list after this event. I would still say that this, you know, apart from some of the educational providers like NNG and a few others, this is not mainstream. And I would have to say that a lot of what I'm presenting, I've kind of invented myself. And so in a sense, you're lucky to have me, but you're unlucky in that the only other place to get more information is to go to my website, because this is a little bit non-mainstream. There are people who talk about information architecture and data design old school, but there are not too many people who talk about the specific connection between the information design and what the user is trying to achieve in any great detail.
Fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, as some of you may know, yeah, Martin is located in Calgary, so please reach out to him. He's really fantastic and also a wonderful person to talk to. And yeah, whenever I have the opportunity to learn from him, I always feel like my brain is just evolving and growing and growing and growing with everything that you're sharing. So it's been really fantastic, and it's always a pleasure to have in the community. And we are so lucky to have you, to be honest. This is a completely delightful conversation. Thank you so much. And yeah, I hope we can keep on bringing you all the time, just whenever we can.
Well, those are wonderful words, Luis. It was a great pleasure to do this. And as I said, you learn by doing. And, you know, I clarified some of my thinking by putting this presentation together. So collectively, we're moving things, we're moving things up for the betterment of everybody. So thanks for letting me present this one.